In every town, there are stories that never make the headlines.
Stories of families still searching for answers and communities still waiting for justice.
I'm Elisa.
And I'm Michael.
Together we host Tragedy, a true crime podcast, where we share the untold stories of victims through the voices of friends, family, and those whose lives were forever changed.
We explore unsolved cases, cold files, and overlooked tragedies, moments that changed everything.
Beyond the headlines, we focus on the people left behind and the questions that still demand answers.
If you believe the past still has something to say, join us.
Listen to Tragedy, a true crime podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. Visit www.tragedyaTrueCrimePodcast.com or connect with us on Facebook at Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast, on X at Tragedy Podcast, or email tragedyaTrueCrimePodcast@gmail.com.
Because behind every tragedy, there's a story that still needs to be told.
You're listening to Missing Persons, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Campus Killings, Below the Surface, and Killer Communications. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its creators, or sponsors. This episode may contain unsettling or disturbing subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
If you'd like to support Missing Persons and get VIP access to things like ad-free listening, early preview episodes, and bonus content of not only this show, but for every other podcast on the AbJack network of indie podcasts, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcast. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting the show in the process. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Welcome to Missing Persons, a podcast dedicated to spreading the word about people who have vanished under mysterious or unexplained circumstances and the family members who are looking for answers. I'm Jess Betancourt.
And I'm Mike Morford. Together, we created this podcast to help give a voice to people who continue to search for their missing loved ones. In some cases, even after decades have gone by. In each episode, you'll hear from Jess giving listeners the backstory and the basic facts of the disappearance.
Then Mike will speak with someone who's intimately connected to the missing person, and his guest will share their story with us. So sit back and enjoy this episode, and who knows, maybe you can help us find someone who's missing. Audrey Herron was a mother of three who vanished without a trace from Catskill, New York in 2002. Audrey Mae Turk was born on October 4th, 1970, to parents Ray and Shirley Turk. Audrey married her first husband and had her daughter Sansia at just 22. The couple divorced, and Audrey met and married Jeff Herron, and they had two more children. Sansia was only 10 when Audrey went missing, her half-siblings significantly younger. She publicly remembered her mom as an amazing mother and a wonderful caregiver for her patients. Audrey worked as a part-time nurse at Columbia Green Long-Term Healthcare Facility, a nursing home located in the Jefferson Heights section of Catskill. On the night of October 29, 2002, Audrey finished up her shift at the nursing home at 11 p.m. Her co-workers saw her leave, presumably to head home to the house she shared with Jeff and the kids in the hamlet of Freehold, about 12 miles away. Audrey left work in Catskill around 11 p.m. According to TrueCrimeNews.com, Audrey walked out of work with several co-workers, although it's not clear whether anyone actually saw her get into her black 1994 Jeep Grand Cherokee with New York Liberty license plate X233UV. Grainy video surveillance footage from a Cumberland Farms across from the nursing home appears to show Audrey's vehicle leaving her workplace, turning left and heading west on State Route 23, the route she traveled regularly to and from work. State Police Lieutenant Peter Kosminski said, quote, "We can't confirm it's the vehicle, but it appears to be. because the quality of the video was very poor and very grainy, and it does appear to leave at the time she would have ended work. The road was dark, winding, narrow, and surrounded by woods and bodies of water, and it was a foggy and rainy night, and visibility was poor. Audrey did not show up at home. It's unclear when Jeff sounded the alarm about her absence. Some reports say he started calling around at 2 a.m. Others say he called her workplace and then her friends and mom, starting at around 6:30. When word spread throughout the Turk and Herron families that Audrey was missing, her stepmother Jean Turk, who worked at division headquarters for the state police, made sure that the New York State Police received a formal missing persons report about her stepdaughter. This report was filed at 9:30 a.m. New York State Police Sergeant William Fitzmaurice and Lieutenant Kuzminski went to Audrey's home and interviewed her family, and then immediately deployed a helicopter to search for any wreckage of the Jeep. Investigators, volunteers, and Audrey's friends went out that very day to search the 12-mile stretch of roadway from Audrey's job to her house. There was no indication along the roadway that Audrey suffered an accident, drove off the road, or took a different route. Over the years, extensive and numerous searches of her trajectory toward home, including both possible routes and any detours she might have taken for some reason, have failed to turn up any evidence of the Jeep or its driver. Several ponds and bodies of water have been searched by divers and even drained in the search for Audrey. We've done ATV, we've done dog searches, we've done an actual house-to-house where we talk to every resident or property owner within an 8-mile circle of her residence, New York State Police Sergeant Fitzmaurice told True Crime News. The New York State Police has stated that they believe foul play befell Audrey. They questioned her former husband, her co-workers, Jeff. They never uncovered any dark secrets or drama in Audrey's life. One rumor that a Russian partner on Jeff's parents' golf course killed Audrey in order to send a warning about unpaid debt owed to him has led police nowhere. Within the past several years, police searched a parcel of private property and drained a pond owned by a man with a criminal history of violent crimes against women whose mother worked at the same healthcare facility as Audrey. Nothing was found. Audrey's 3 children, Sansia, Katie, and Quinn, and her extended family do not believe Audrey left on her own. She and her husband were building a new home on his family's golf course. She adored her children, and she had literally that very day gotten a raise at work. No one knows of any issues in Audrey's life, no depression, addiction issues, or enemies. There is a lot that we don't know about Audrey's case. It's been reported that her purse was found at her home, but this is unverified. We don't know whether the spare tire from her Jeep being found at her house is significant or not. Reports that the rear doors of Audrey's Jeep did not lock are unconfirmed. Whether her husband Jeff actually failed to complete a polygraph, why he was called only mostly cooperative by police, and whether he is considered a person of interest in Audrey's disappearance is unknown. Police say Audrey is missing under suspicious circumstances and that no one has been ruled out. She was last seen wearing a dark green medical scrubs and a blue turtleneck. She is just 5 feet tall and 105 pounds. Alyssa and Mike from the Tragedy podcast have covered Audrey's case extensively and have submitted public records requests to try to obtain some of the unknown information from the state police. They sat down to talk with Mike Morford about what they've learned about Audrey and their coverage of her case. That conversation is coming up after a word from our sponsors.
All right. So with us today, once again, are Mike and Alyssa, host of the Tragedy podcast. I want to welcome you back to Missing Persons.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming back. Some of our listeners may remember you from your last appearance on our show when we discussed Ian Rogers' case out of Florida. I know you guys have also been digging into another Florida case we covered, and that was Michael John Olson's. But the case you're talking about today with us is a case out of New York, and that's the case of Audrey Mae Herron. How did you guys get involved in that case or become interested in that case?
I found out about Audrey from the Map the Missing Facebook page. I was looking for some possibilities for our next story and our next family to reach out to. So I just contacted the moderator of Map the Missing, and I said, hey, what's a case and a story that's really stuck with you that, you would like us to dig into? And the person immediately said Audrey. And so from there, I just went to Audrey's Facebook group and contacted the moderator there. And it just, from there, it went really well. So
It has.
I was using some of my resources, and we really want to cover cases and stories that resonate with people who are doing this work with us.
That's awesome. And it's good to have different allies that you can reach out to and people that can get you in touch with the right people to talk about these cases and really present a part of the case you don't hear about. Because with our show, you sort of go into the background, you talk to people that are involved in the search or connected to the person. A lot of times you hear something on the news and you don't get that sort of behind the scenes, what's really going on. You just get some blurbs that are out of the news and that's it. So you guys really do some good work and get to the heart of the matter in these cases. I'm curious, going into the case for the first time, what were your thoughts on it versus where they are now?
Something I find very interesting about Audrey's case, she disappeared in 2002, and initially there was quite a bit of media coverage. Some of the other families that we have supported, there has not been very much media coverage, or there wasn't really any media coverage. And so with Audrey, we were able to find a lot of things before we even spoke with the family members. Some of her friends went on the Montel show. There's that psychic Sylvia, I think her last name is Brown.
That's right, Sylvia Brown.
She discussed Audrey, and they had flyers, and I mean, they had a lot of media coverage initially. And so, from there and just watching those kinds of things, it seemed like there was a fairly prevalent theme that there may have been some foul play involved. And now that we have spoken to three or four friends and family members, as well as Bill McIntosh with Adventures with Purpose, I'm kind of leaning that she may have gone off the road somehow. So my thinking has just changed a little bit. It kind of opens up a different perspective for me that's not the same from kind of what at least I was seeing in the beginning.
Yeah, and that's kind of the same opinion I have. And we've gone through this case quite a bit. We've looked at all the evidence. To be fair, there's not a lot of evidence. This is that's what's traditional in missing person cases. I'm sure everyone who's listening knows that. But we're really struggling with the foul play angle of it because the scene was set to where she could have disappeared into the night through an accident, going off the road, going into water, and there's a lot more evidence or parts of the story that really support that theory than some of these other things. Not to say that we're putting aside these other things. That's not what I'm intending to say here. But we're trying to piece together the most likely outcome and then even possibly identify new places to search.
And I know in some of the other cases you've dug into, you're always talking to friends, family, investigators, that kind of stuff. How much of that were you able to do in Audrey's case, and how has that helped you?
Well, to start with the interview, I was actually very, very happy with how many people were willing to come forward. And so we've been able to hear this story told from a number of different angles. We've also had a lot better luck with, getting a hold of law enforcement that's been involved in the case. We're actually currently putting together a series of questions that we're submitting to them. And then we're actually hoping we can have them on the show. It's actually the first time that we've been able to get a law enforcement officer to even consider coming on to our podcast. So we're excited about that altogether. But generally speaking, what do you have?
Yeah, we have spoken to at least 3 of Audrey's close, good friends. We've spoken to her stepmom, who is the person who actually filed the missing persons report. We've spoken to her daughter. Now, her daughter was 10 when she went missing. Audrey has 2 younger children that were like 1 and 4 or 2 and 4 when she disappeared. But we did speak to her oldest daughter. And we have another person who is a friend more from the perspective of her husband was Audrey's husband's friend. So we're getting, I think, a very good picture because we're seeing lots of different perspectives as Michael was discussing. And when I want to go back to, the evidence, it is really promising that we are able to have this open line of communication with the New York State Trooper who's leading this case in as quick as a fashion as we are. I did submit the request for records, and I think that's taking a little bit of time, which is fine because they do still consider it an open case. So they'll need to redact some things. But, having that additional perspective and maybe some evidence will help us to kind of lean in a specific direction.
And yeah, it's pretty interesting you brought these different perspectives because when you talk about a case like this, you can really get a picture, of all sides of a person's life, from the police investigation, from the people that knew them, from their family members, from their coworkers. So, that's what I really like about what you guys do. You try and get all those different angles.
Yes. And we have also reached out to her husband. She was married at the time she disappeared. And we are also actively trying to contact him because that's an important piece of the story as well. So we believe we are doing our due diligence to give anybody and everybody who would like to speak and share their perspective and their story with us.
Yeah, one thing that we're also kind of evaluating right now is we've noticed as we go from case to case to case, we found this interesting anomaly in each one of these cases that there's always one key witness, one key person, one key family member that just absolutely refused to speak. And it's not even just us, it's just generally. And in this particular case, it happens to be her husband, Jeff.
Yeah, and we'll definitely have some questions about that, his cooperation, that kind of stuff. I guess to start off, can you tell listeners a little bit about Audrey, her life, job, family, that kind of stuff? What was going on in her life? And was there any kind of, looking back, any kind of red flags or warnings that she might be at risk of disappearing?
Mhm. Yeah, Audrey vanished in August 29th of 2002 from the Catskill, New York area. At the time, she was married, had 3 children, and she was a nurse at a healthcare facility. Her pattern and routine was fairly typical. She worked generally, I guess you would call it not really the night shift, but second shift.
Mhm.
She would go into work at 3 p.m. and then she would get off work at 11 p.m. Sometimes she did work a double. So she would call her husband and let her know that she'd picked up a second shift and then she would stay for that next 8-hour shift. And that didn't happen very regularly, but she was very good about communicating with him when that did happen. Because, if I expect my spouse home at 11 p.m. and they're not there by midnight, I kind of wonder what's going on.
We're making some phone calls.
Right. So they seem to, she seemed to be very good with communication. Um, as I mentioned, she had 3 children. So her oldest is Sansia, and Sansia came to this relationship from a different relationship that Audrey had. But then she had 2 children with Jeff. And it seems like life was pretty typical, nothing really out of the ordinary. He worked for a golf course. The family owned a golf course, and I believe they were in the process of building a new home kind of closer to the golf course when this event happened. And we have spoken, and this is a good question. We ask everyone that we speak to, did you notice anything in the weeks, days, or months unusual leading up to this person's disappearance? And we haven't really had anybody say anything unusual had happened prior to. We do believe that she did have an upcoming doctor's appointment the next day. Now, we've heard some different things about what that doctor's appointment was about, but it could be that this was sort of a stressor for her. So I don't really know if that is coincidental, but it is something that several people have mentioned to us. The next day, she was supposed to have this doctor's appointment.
Yeah, and I think you start looking at things like that, just timing-wise, what's going to be coming up on a schedule right when that person goes missing, and is it a red flag, or could there be some kind of connection? So, definitely, makes sense to ask those questions and wonder if there's any connection. It may be something that's not even connected, but certainly important to look at. Um
Yes, and there's actually another thing that was happening. Actually, the evening that she went missing, her oldest daughter had been out of town for a month with her grandparents. And so on August 29th, when Audrey disappeared, her daughter had returned and she was due to pick her up the next day. And we've talked with people quite a lot about that. Like I'm a mom and my daughter used to go on trips with my mom, and I was always excited when she came home. And so people will say to us, Santia was coming back that day. She was due to go pick her up. It's just another one of those sort of odd things. It's an important day. What happened? Everybody says there's no way that she would have just left on her own accord, especially knowing that her daughter was back and she was due to pick her up the next day.
Hmm. So let's talk about that night she vanished. She's on this work shift. Her shift ends. She leaves like she probably did countless nights before. What as far as timeline goes, what happened? Did anybody see her leave? What was that night like after the shift ended?
So from what we've been able to gather, her shift ended around 11. She talked to a coworker outside for some, small, length of time. She was, and then she, got in the car or got in her Cherokee, and she was supposedly headed home. Now, there was originally a report where another coworker, or maybe it might have been the same one, I'm not sure if we ever really differentiated that, said that they followed her out and they saw her turn. And after more investigation, we discovered through the stories we've listened to that person actually, for some reason, they thought of their mind they were helping, but they finally admitted later that didn't happen, that they didn't see her leave. And so you have a situation now to where she turns, she's headed home. She has a 12-mile stretch. It's dark. It's my understanding it was wet, foggy. That's kind of the condition for the night. And she never made that destination. And yeah, that's it. This is just poof. And, there's from there you start getting into, okay, where did she go? There's been a lot of speculation which route she could take. I know a lot of people we've spoken to, they talk about different routes that could have been taken, whether she went to pick up cigarettes, whether she stopped by to visit a friend. None of this do we have any evidence that actually occurred. It was just trying to add additional routes to consider. And when doing the initial search the next day, what was most compelling about it was they couldn't find any areas where the guardrail was damaged, where the foliage around the sides of the roads were damaged. They couldn't find any, marks on the road, any type of, anything at all to even give them a good understanding of where to search along this road. It did not look like there had been some type of accident or someone coming off the road. So this is a situation where it's just poof, gone.
So there's a couple different routes she could have taken, but I'm assuming over a 12-mile stretch, they're going to involve some common roads. And so as I assume that's going to be a limited amount of routes she could take. Um, and, that obviously the more routes you can take, the more areas would need to be searched or whatever. So I want to talk about some of that stuff coming up, but I do want to find out too, when was it noticed that she was missing? Who first recognized there was a problem?
Yeah, so according to some of the recollections of her very good friends, it was around 6:30 or 7 when her husband first called, 6:30 a.m., 7 a.m., he first called to see if she was at work still, if perhaps she'd picked up another shift and hadn't communicated that with her. We do know that at 9:30 p.m., the night that she went missing, she did call home because she had received a raise. So they had her and her husband had a conversation at around 9:30 p.m. And it has been reported to us now, because we have not been able to get in contact with her husband. We cannot verify this, but several people have said to us that he did wake up at 2:30 a.m. And reportedly did some dishes and then went back to bed. And then it wasn't until 6:30 that he woke up again and he called her workplace. Around 9:30 is when her stepmom, who we've spoken to, did make the report that she was missing. So that's kind of the time frame. It seems like 9:30 p.m. is the last verifiable time she spoke to anyone, and then 9:30 a.m. is when the missing persons report was filed.
So supposedly he's at 6:30 in the morning looking for her. And did he go out looking for her during that time before she was reported missing?
We don't know that for sure. We do know that he made several phone calls, called her workplace, During the course and even later into the day and into the afternoon, he started calling some of the people that we have spoken directly with. So we know for sure that he was making phone calls to those people much later in the afternoon. But since we have not been able to speak with him directly, that's not information that we could conclusively say.
Mm. And so what was as far as you know, or as far as you've learned, what was the police response like from the beginning?
The friends and family report that it was very good. Immediately, they were out searching, and they went out searching too. All these friends that
Yes, they did.
we have talked to right away and started putting up posters and flyers. But we have heard from pretty much everybody that the police response was immediate. That they were contacting the hospital, they were driving some of these routes, looking for what Michael was talking about, any damage to guardrails. And then, of course, our experience, even this many years later, has been wildly positive with the trooper who's leading this case. Other of our stories, it has taken us several months to, I'll call it, crack some level of communication with law enforcement.
Also true.
But this one, I sent an email directly to the trooper who's leading the case, and he got back to me within less than a week. There's a very strong advocate in Audrey's case. Her name is Marie, and she stays in communication with this trooper, I would say probably once or twice a week, particularly now that we are sharing her story and it's kind of getting elevated again.
You've got basically nothing to go on here. You've got no sign of any kind of guardrails damaged, any place where a car might have gone off the road, those kinds of things. Um, so no real place to look. But I want to backtrack a second. So presumably Audrey was going home. That's where she was headed. And unless she made a stop someplace along the way, she should have been there. And I'm imagining a 12-mile road, depending on the conditions, that kind of stuff wouldn't have taken very long. You mentioned in the middle of the night, her husband wakes up and claims to do some dishes. Number one, I find that a little strange, but hey, maybe people burn the midnight oil if they can't sleep by doing dishes. I don't know. I'm not accusing him of anything. It sounds kind of weird to me, but I wanted to more touch on the fact, did he notice that his wife wasn't home at that time?
The answer is it's speculative at best because again, Jeff's the one person we haven't really been able to speak to, and we would love to have that conversation to find out. We've heard everything. He got up to do dishes. He got up and made a phone call to his dad, was told to us one time. But again, we can't confirm any of that without talking to Jeff. And so, yeah, we would. Do we think if let's make the assumption that occurred? Do we think it's strange that you get up at 2:30, 3 in the morning, notice your wife is missing, and your action is to do dishes and call your dad? Yeah, I think it's weird, but we don't even know if that's what happened.
Yeah, and again, that's the problem when you don't have everybody to help fill in those blanks and talking to him himself. You have to go by what's been reported, what other people are saying. But obviously, if you get up at that time and you maybe just doesn't see her, he just goes out there for a smoke or something and decides he's going to do dishes while he's out there and never really realizes she's gone. But it's just an interesting point that he's up in the middle of the night and, as far as we know, doesn't know she's missing. Um, so we do have some assorted questions, and they're in no particular order. I just want to run through them. And these are things that caught our attention while we were doing research for this. And I hope you guys can have the answers to some of these questions and can help us dissect them. But the first thing we wanted to ask, um, you mentioned the search for roadways, tire marks, debris, guardrails damage, any of that kind of stuff. What was the extent of that since there were, I'm assuming, more than one route she could have gone? Did they make it a point to try different routes looking for that kind of stuff?
So the two main routes are along what's called State Highway 32 and State Highway 23. And lots of searches were done along that. Is like we said before, this is a typical route for her. This is assuming that she just went straight home. That brings up the questions about thinking outside of the box and maybe she was going to get cigarettes or needed to get gas and took a different route. But as far as we can tell with the family and law enforcement, and as well as Bill with Adventures with Purpose, lots of searching has been done. And I believe Bill has an intention of going back. And even he has done some widening of the search, not just along those typical routes. There was also a thought about, well, maybe she did not want to wait to go pick up her daughter. So perhaps she went ahead and just drove up to where Sansia was to pick her up and didn't make it. These are all theories. We don't know, but I think it does I think they are doing a good job of thinking just outside of the typical route, because we have heard there was really nothing that showed unusual on any of the roads. And they were out searching like that morning, that next week. And, the belief is if the car had gone off on one of those two main routes, there would have been some evidence of that. And they just didn't see that. And so then I think that's when they started broadening and widening the search areas. And there have been a lot of tips that have come in along the way that have been shared with us, and law enforcement responds to every single tip and different search areas where, people say, oh, I've used Google Earth and I found this image, because her car is also missing, obviously. And so then law enforcement will take a look at those too. So I would say it feels like they have done their due diligence thinking about several different options that may have happened in their search for her and her vehicle.
One thing I'd read too was that there was, maybe some people theorizing or just trying to look for answers, that there was a junkyard on one of those routes that maybe her car could have been disposed of at that junkyard. I mean, I don't know that there's anything that even would tie the case to that junkyard, but is there any reason to think that junkyard could play a role in this case?
Something that is really supportive for us as we learn about this case is Marie, and she's been sort of the main advocate for Audrey and has been involved in this since the day it happened. And Marie does a really great job of reminding people, both in Audrey's group and in our Facebook group, that these have been explored, investigated, and have been found, to probably not be involved in her disappearance. So I would say at this point, I don't know of anything. And I think that particular junkyard picture I just saw pop up for me personally in the last couple of days. Some of these things are reoccurring theories that come up when the case gets reinvigorated. And so Marie does a really nice job of helping people to say, hey, thank you so much for doing this. And this has been investigated. But she will also always turn everything over to the trooper, because that's one thing we say is, if you think you know something, send it over and let them do their work as far as, is this a credible tip? Does this support the case? And that will be a really great piece of information and question, I think, that we can use as we move forward with building our partnership and asking the trooper.
Yeah, and that's a theme too that we always really focus on is, there's so many times we'll be in conversations and, someone will tell us something that we know is not part of any record that we've seen. And so the first question we ask is, well, have you told law enforcement this? And then it is amazing how many times they'll say, well, no.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, okay, well, that needs to happen. We try to put the theme out there that it's not our job to decide what's credible and not. That's their job. It's our job to get information to them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then one thing we definitely want to ask you about was Audrey's cell phone. Anything come to light from that? Any kind of pings or tracing or any kind of tracking of it? Anything like that?
I think what we have to remember is put our mindset in 2002. And, absolutely, with some of our current cases, we are actively trying to find cell phone records. What we have learned, people keep referring to the phone that Audrey has as a bag phone. And obviously the technology in 2002 was not as advanced as it is now. And so we have not been able to get anything from law enforcement nor anybody that we've spoken to who's referenced any kind of useful information from the cell phone, because the technology just didn't really.
Yeah, we're talking. This is really old, and it's that technology wasn't well designed. It's the precipice of the cell phone industry, And so having records like that we normally have today is just, it wasn't part of the case.
And the topography of that area.
Also,
I mean, she's in the Catskills. And even now, we drove through that area this past summer, and cell phones drop now.
It's spotty.
In 2026.
Okay. And did she regularly keep that with her when she went to work, do you know?
I do not know that question. I do know that as far as her personal effects, there has been some conversation about her purse and where her purse ended up. And was it, some people say they saw it at the house, some people don't recollect it being there. Other people are saying, well, the security, as far as your personal effects at her workplace, was not great. So possibly she left her purse at home because they didn't have lockers and things like that at work. So this purse is an interesting thing. I think it's a little bit more evidentiary than perhaps the cell phone.
And one thing I also want to mention about the cell phone, just so to kind of paint a little bit of perspective here, is I used to have one of these bag phones back when they first came out. And today we leave our cell phone all the time. It's an extension of our hand half the time, and which it really probably shouldn't be, but that's a different conversation. But bag phones, when you typically use them, you didn't just leave them on. You turned them on when you intended to use them. The charge didn't last an incredible amount of time, and it was too big to carry around. You typically did leave it in your car, or you left it in a locker or wherever you did. This is not something you had on you, and if it wasn't on you, it also wasn't on. Not typically.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back to all those years ago when I first had my cell phone, and it was sort of what you're saying. I didn't have it half the time. I'd keep it in my glove box, and if I needed it, that's when I used it. Now, I'd read report that Audrey kept her phone in her car, and law enforcement did try some attempt to trace it, but it was non-responsive, meaning it was dead or off, I assume?
Right.
Okay.
I think that's why it's been a non-factor in the case, because back then it just wasn't. It wasn't like it. We didn't use that technology like we use it today. Today, it's absolutely the first thing you want to go to. But back then, if it was on, that means she was using it most likely, and if it wasn't being used, it was probably turned off, and that wouldn't be unreasonable in how that would be used.
And you want to shift to the purse a little bit because obviously that's an interesting clue. And I had read this on Reddit, and again, it's Reddit, so I'm not sure who posted this, but it says the police department claims that Audrey's purse was at her home and not in the vehicle with her that she disappeared in. And many in her life feel that Audrey would have brought the purse with her that day to work no matter what, which makes them question if Audrey did make it home that day and if something happened there or something happened to Audrey and her purse was brought back to the house somehow. So
Yeah,
I think that's the the $1 million question is, was that purse there all along, or did it somehow get back to the house?
That's a great question. We've heard that too. And it does beg the question, did she get all the way home and then something happened at home? There's also another piece of evidence that lends itself to an interesting, just an interesting clue. We're not sure if it's related or not, but there's been some reports that where we've discussed people where the spare tire, because Jeeps back then, typically, they had the spare tire mounted inside the rear storage compartment of the Jeep. That was pretty traditional with those models. And so in this situation, the spare tire had been taken out of the back of the vehicle, and it was actually at the house. And there's two different ways to look at that piece of evidence. You can look at it from the perspective of something nefarious happened and the tire was removed and maybe she was put in the back. I mean, I think there's no evidence proving that, by the way. That's just one way you can look at it. And the other idea is people have told us that she was hauling around like a large, box or several boxes of baby clothes. And that could have been the reason that the tire was removed. But it was interesting that the tire was definitely not in the Jeep.
And yeah, it would be interesting to know if that's something that had been the case for several weeks, or
Right.
did it just happen that day that the tire is missing, So anybody that might know that would certainly be worth talking to.
Yeah, we've asked some questions around that. And, unfortunately, we haven't been able to get a solid timeline of when that tire was removed. And again, that would be, not to keep belaboring the subject, but that's a great question for Jeff.
And I want to sort of go back to the actual night she vanishes. Coworkers see her afterwards. She has conversations with them. Did anybody actually see her get in the vehicle? I know you said one person said that they saw her leave, but they changed their story later on. But now, do we know if anybody actually saw her make it into her vehicle and drive off?
At this point, no. The only report we have is that one we mentioned, and then that person later came forward and said that she didn't really see any of that. So again, we're not really sure what she was trying to do, help or hurt the investigation. But if you take that person's testimony out of it, the answer to your question is no. No one really saw her drive away
Hmm.
that we know
And
of, at least.
it opens the possibility that it's late at night. Someone sees a lone woman heading to her car in the parking lot. Maybe they're an opportunity to carjack them or something else. Um, and I had read that the Jeep's car rear doors didn't lock, so maybe somebody could have gotten into the vehicle. Is that accurate? Do you know?
I don't know anything about that. Um, Hopefully, that would be some information that we can get when we get a response to our request for information.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, and obviously too, and I'm sure you touched on this, but I didn't think about till just now. Surveillance cameras are everywhere today. Is there any evidence that there's any surveillance cameras at her work or anywhere on that route home back then?
The route, based on where they're at, I would say the idea of surveillance cameras, especially in 2002, would be slim at best. It's slim at best today. Now, at the hospital, that's a different conversation, and that's one of the things that we had already planned on looking for when we get the FOIA, if we get it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you know back then, you would think, especially if it's a part of security procedure, they might have surveillance of that parking lot, and it would be worth looking at. If that
100%.
that was worth
100%. Yeah.
revealing anything. So hopefully you do find that out and you're able to get more information about that. And there's no guarantee maybe that spot wherever she was parked wasn't even in camera view, but definitely worth looking at. And I want to talk about something else just regarding the job or the work. Um, and that's the possibility of anyone there at work that may have been worth looking at. Yeah, I'd read, one report about somebody with a shady background being there. Is there any accurate information regarding that person?
Yeah, what you were discussing is a person whose mother worked at the facility where Audrey worked, and you are right. This particular person does have, we'll call it a shady background, and I believe even is currently incarcerated for some of those behaviors. This name comes up quite frequently when we are speaking to people, and I think it is just people again trying to keep an open mind, right? Who is in her circle, not even a close circle, but in the circle, who may be someone who uh, demonstrates risky behaviors, who could have had some contact with her. And so, you know, we know who you're talking about, and there is a connection there. His mom worked at the same place that Audrey worked. And apparently his mom actually was very active in the searches. And so people will say things like, well, people who are involved, they put themselves in the case sort of as a distractor. But we don't have any particular evidence that leans towards that person specific to Audrey, but it is a name that is on the table.
And these charges we're talking about in this person's history are supposedly rape and
Yeah.
kidnapping attempts. So,
Yes.
that's very troubling. Do you know if police questioned this person and what extent they did?
I do not know. Again, we're going to go back to needing that information from our FOIA request and also our connection with the trooper. We have a series of questions that we are going to send to him, and we will add any and every question that we want to present, knowing that several may not get answered due to the nature of the case.
Now, I did read that this person we're talking about, there was a theory that maybe his property would reveal evidence, or maybe even Audrey's body, but they drained the pond and searched it with cadaver dogs, but didn't find anything. Is that accurate? Do you know?
It is what we see people who are close to the case discussing, but without, accuracy, and people's recollections of what has happened over the course of the years are kind of different. I can't really prove that, but lots of people talk about it.
And the other thing about even the searches like that, when we spoke to Bill over at Adventures with Purpose, he identified a number of ponds and areas on private property that he has been unable or hasn't had an opportunity, I'm sure both, to get permission to search that he thinks are viable locations, that belong to friends or people at least that she knew. And so I know those are opening up to additional search areas.
And, along those lines, the Adventures with Purpose searching areas of water, on the routes that she would have traveled to get home, are there any pretty good sized creeks or ponds that could conceal a vehicle?
The answer is yes. I mean, that's one of the things that we talked about with him extensively. And a lot of those have been searched. He even talks about, really going through and identifying and even speculating things that she could have done after work. Now, a lot of people disagree that she would have done that, but to me, that kind of wasn't the point. The point was he was trying to inject any possibility to broaden where he could search. But to answer your question, yeah, there's lots of areas, and he even discusses, areas that cars can go in and then disappear. That when you think they wouldn't even be deep enough, based on how they landed, or if they went into this really weedy or pad cover area on a pond, and that he said there's still definitely opportunities along that route and along some other routes that he said believes he deserves more attention.
And one other weird theory, I thought it was weird, but who knows? It seems unlikely, but you never know. That the Russian mob could have been involved in this disappearance, and apparently police, from what I read at least, looked into it. Is there anything to that, and where does that stem from? That Russian mob theory?
It's interesting. So that's a theory that's come up in quite a few conversations, and what I'm going to say now may be a little bit unpopular, but at this point, I think the Russian mob theory is a little bit of a red herring. I think this is there's the beginning of that story is about a silent partner associated with the golf course that the family owns. And so in that supposedly the family, maybe even Jeff himself, owed money, and that this was some kind of retribution for not paying that money. To me, I get it. I understand. We don't know this person. I'm sure this is probably where maybe a nefarious, situation. I mean, we don't know exactly. What we do know is there's no evidence that's been presented to us that we've been able to find that lends a lot of credibility to the story. Again, we can't exclude it. So I'm not trying to disparage anyone who believes in that story. But at this point, I think that's a reach, and doesn't help us necessarily, from what we can tell so far, find Audrey.
So, anytime something happens to a person, they go missing, they're murdered, whatever the case may be, obviously the first place people look at and the police investigate is their inner circle, which is usually their spouse, their person they're in a relationship with, and they look at their life and their interactions, their relationships, and with Jeff, it was no exception. I'm sure they looked at him this way too. We talked a little bit about what he said he did the night she disappeared, and I think we all agreed that was a little bit weird, doing dishes at 2:30 in the morning, but
Agreed.
that's what he claimed happened. But I want to talk about a little bit of the actions further out, like when the searches happened. He didn't take part reportedly in these searches. He didn't do any interviews or TV to try and plead for his wife or anyone to come forward. Is that all accurate?
From far as we can tell, that is accurate. That story has remained consistent throughout this entire investigation. And do we find it strange? Absolutely. I mean, but again, this goes back to why we want to talk to him, is because everyone has their reasons. Everyone deals with grief in a different way. Everyone deals with stressful situations the different way. And I'm trying to be on the real positive side of that behavior is he's having to protect and defend children from what's happening right now. And so parents will do a lot to protect their children. I mean, Elisa right here has done lots of things for her own child that, and so there could be, it's one of those things that it could be, oh, this is proof that he did it. Or it could be that he was trying to protect his family from the realities of what he believed was unfolding. We don't know.
And that's a very good argument, especially when the children are young, but now they're adults. So, that would make me say, okay, I understand that reasoning then, but why not come forward now and talk?
And it's a great question, and it's exactly why we have been repeatedly reaching out.
Yeah. So even though he didn't, and maybe this answer, but has anyone that knows him, did they talk with him, or did he explain why he wasn't involved in these searches?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. At least, do you know?
Not specific to that answer. I think initially from what we've heard from friends, they were at the house and would go by, and, I just don't know the nature of those conversations. But certainly now, those of our listeners who have heard what we have already put out, as far as Audrey's case, can hear these very same questions that you're asking coming from the people we are speaking to.
And I did read too that he did agree to take a polygraph and reportedly was inconclusive. Is that accurate?
Yeah, the way it was reported to us, and again, we can't prove this part. This is again one of the stories we've heard, is that he was at the police station. He was having his polygraph taken, and then his father came in and pulled him out of the room, and basically the polygraph wasn't completed, so therefore it was considered inconclusive.
It's interesting. And again, not that polygraphs are, they can't be used in court for, obviously, but, and most attorneys would advise if they feel their client is going to be looked at in a negative light, they advise them not to take a polygraph. So, I mean, I understand not taking a polygraph for those reasons, but then again, it opens up to people that are suspicious of that person. It makes them say, aha, he won't take a polygraph, or he won't complete the polygraph. So, it raises more questions there.
I agree, and that's one reason we've struggled with eliminating him from our point of suspicion, is because you've got a situation where you have the because everything compounds, right? So you have the 2:30 in the morning washing dishes, last call on his dad, if that's what happened. Again, can't prove that, but then continue in the story. Now you have someone who also has not participated in any of the searches, as far as we can tell. Okay, that's what we're hearing from the stories. Seems to be true. Okay, so let's add that to it. Now we add, still even years later, is not really communicating, not involved in the story, still refusing to take interviews with anyone. Okay, that seems strange, but again, adding to that narrative. And so, yeah, I don't think Jeff's doing himself any favors if his intention is to not be suspected. And then again, you go back to this, the polygraph. We pull him out of the polygraph. We don't complete it. It's inconclusive. You factor all these things together, they start adding up to, all right, Jeff, what's going on?
Now, obviously, we talked about it earlier, the purse being at home, which, if we could prove that Audrey made it home, then that would solve part of the mystery. And then it'd just be a question of what happened when she got there. But I want to touch on the purse again being found at home, because I forgot to ask you this earlier. Do we know what contents might have been found in it? Say her driver's license because if that's there, would she have driven to work without it? I mean, was there money, credit cards, any of that stuff that she might have wanted to have with her while she was going back and forth to work? Do we know any of that?
We tried to find that out so far. No one knows the contents of the purse right now. We're hoping, again, we're kind of leaning on the details in the FOIA, maybe providing some information like that. But yeah, we've asked a few questions around that, and we've even got speculation of whether someone really saw the purse. And so we're not 100% it was spotted, But if it was, we would also make the assumption that it would been investigated by police, and the contents of the purse, to your question, would be in that list. And so we're really kind of crossing our fingers for that to be true.
And I know the state police have said that Jeff has been mostly cooperative, and he reportedly permitted multiple searches of his home. Do you know if anything was found in those searches of interest?
No, we don't have any details on those searches. And it was just interesting to us when we watched some of the reports we found online, the term mostly cooperative. It wasn't cooperative, it's mostly cooperative. And so to me, I'm like, okay, well, that means he was uncooperative in other areas. I'd be curious where he was cooperative versus uncooperative, see if there's any pattern there.
And we didn't really talk too much about this, but I'm curious, what was the relationship like between them, according to the people that knew them and talked about them? Was there any kind of fighting, abuse, any affairs, any financial problems, anything going on in the relationship between Jeff and Audrey? And how long had they been together?
Uh, so there is some conflicting information about that. And I think, that's the nature of friendship, right? I mean, I don't know how men's friendships work, but women tend to be, there maybe be those one or two isolated people where we might share everything, where we might shield other people from quote, the everythings. And so there have been some people who have said, wow, I mean, we don't know of anything that seemed out of the ordinary. The relationship seemed fine. And then we have other people who say, well, in confidence at this event, Audrey was saying, things about maybe her unhappiness with the marriage. She was also, as people report, kind of like changing her hair color and maybe, I'm going to call it, being a little spicy.
Oh, yes.
Yes, that's a better word. And she would kind of, where some people would know, like smoking is a very good example. There are some people who knew she smoked because she wasn't supposed to smoke from what they told us. And there are other people who were like, she smoked? I didn't know she smoked. So it's just really hard to say. But, some people do say that there may have been some, I don't know, conflict or contentiousness within the marriage. But we're going to go back to, without being able to speak to Jeff, these are just, people's recollections.
Yeah, and even that opinion of that was not wildly adopted.
No.
Some people said they thought something was going on. Other people said, no, we thought the relationship was fine. And so there wasn't any details widely shared about some massive relationship problem.
Yeah, and I think when a person goes missing like this, their whole life sort of gets dissected and exposed and put out there as much as it can be without having all the reports and things that are details that maybe you'll get once you get some FOIA requests done. But it seems like people are really looked at closely every aspect of their life, and then you have certain friends, acquaintances, family members that know one side of that person, and then you have other ones that know a different part of their life that the other people didn't know. So I always find that interesting.
Yes, and we agree. In all of the other stories and families that we've supported, we're seeing the same pattern that you're talking about different behavior. But yeah, I think you're right on it. And so it's not necessarily founded that there was really anything significant going on.
And, I just want to point out too that Jeff has never been charged in relation to his wife's disappearance. So put that out there.
That's correct.
But do you know if police have ever mentioned him being a person of interest?
That is one of our questions for law enforcement when we have that interview. We are hoping they will answer it. But as far as we know, well, we don't know. I think maybe I should say it that way.
So I wanted to touch on the missing persons flyer for Audrey's case that has some, missing under suspicious circumstances language in there. It sort of seems interesting. What's your take on that?
Yeah, the missing persons flyer is really quite comprehensive. It gives even the VIN of the Jeep Grand Cherokee and the license plate number, but it does say right underneath her name, missing, quote, under suspicious circumstances. So that's something we found pretty early on. And, that seems really interesting. Now, I don't know who created this missing persons flyer, but it does sort of lend to the direction of some sort of foul play, which seems to align with what we have learned in our limited contact thus far with law enforcement.
Yeah. And to me, in fairness, I think almost any missing persons case is mysterious if it wasn't
Or suspicious.
or suspicious. Yeah, I mean, so I don't know. To me, I don't take maybe too much from it because it is suspicious. But again, what's that term suspicious mean? Is it suspicious because there's some information we don't know about that may have played a role, or is it just because there's no real explanation? So um, it's definitely interesting, and I hope you're able to maybe find more on that flyer and the language and who decided to use that language might
Mhm.
help. And one question I meant to ask you earlier when we were talking about the hospital surroundings and the possibility of surveillance cameras, what's the crime rate in that area at that time?
No, that's a very good question and something that we haven't necessarily dug into. But again, this will be a great question for us to add to our list for the lead investigator when hopefully we're able to speak with him, and something we can dig into too.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm thinking that area, and I don't know that area well, but from what I've read and what I remember about it, it doesn't seem like a high crime rate area. But if you suddenly said that there had been a number of carjackings in that area leading up to that, or attacks on women, or something strange like that, then you might say, "Aha, maybe this is an avenue to go down." So I was just thinking about that. Um, so we talked about a number of different things: the possibility she drove off the road, the possibility she made it home, the possibility that a mob was involved in it. All kinds of theories, and it's sort of natural in cases like this. People were just firing stuff out there based on everything that's been presented. I'm curious what both you as podcasters have been working on this case, what your own theories might be, and maybe those closest to Audrey, what their theories might be.
That's a great question. So we try not to build too many conclusions, and when we first start a story, and so 'cause that can kind of jade your perspective. And so I go into all these conversations with a fairly open mind. And the two theories that I think are resonating with me right now regarding the case is the running off the road and disappearing in the forest or a pond or whatever. I think that is a theory that has not been fully fleshed out, and I think there's still more opportunity to search based on that as a theory. And then the other theory that is still worth investigating is this strange behavior from Jeff. You can justify that behavior in one direction, just like I said earlier, but you can justify it in another, even to the point where he knows something or something occurred. There's enough strangeness there that it's still worth investigating. I'm not committed to either one of those yet because I still think we're in the investigative and research phase of this before we do anything. And it's interesting when you start talking about the family and friends that we've spoken with so far. It's kind of all over the place. Some buy into the Russian mob theory, which again, that's not one of my more favorite ones. Um, and then most people do think that Jeff's behavior is extremely suspicious and that they feel that there's some level of involvement there and that potentially even his father knows about it based on a quick little impromptu news agency that ran up on him while he was mowing his grass. But on the flip side, there's other people. I mean, we spoke to Karina, for instance. She indicated that she had a hard time believing that Jeff could possibly be involved in any of this because she knows him, and that just doesn't. It's not something that's really part of her belief.
So, unfortunately, in this case, there's just really nothing that points directly in one direction that would make it easier to solve, probably if it did. But
That's correct. I
um,
figured if we had a better direction, we'd probably know where Audrey is right now.
yeah, and if the police had one specific angle to research, maybe it would lead to answers. But um, with that in mind, is there any possibility in everyone you've talked to and who knew Audrey best, is there any possibility she simply just drove off and started a new life someplace? We hear that thrown out in a lot of cases, but is there any possibility in this case that might have happened?
Well, you know, whenever we do think about that, and there are other cases that we're working on that I believe that is the theory that should be investigated the most. In this particular case, there's no motive for that. For the most part, her life was going well. They're building a house. She's got her daughter coming back, who's just recently gotten back in town. And, we talked multiple people about how devoted she was to her family and friends. And she had a really great circle of friends that she hung out with, clearly based on the fantastic conversations we've had with all of them. And I can't get my head around that being a possibility. I mean, Melissa, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think I personally sometimes I just discount that right away, but I think that's because I'm a mom. And I can't imagine doing that as a mom. But I mean, I agree with what Michael is saying, that seems very unlikely.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be one thing if somebody had talked about starting over or there was something that led someone to believe that that was a possibility, but, it gets thrown out in every case like this, and, most of the times when these cases are solved, that's not the outcome. But, I mean, every once in a while there are. But I wanna ask you about something you just said, and I meant to ask you earlier about this. You mentioned, Audrey's daughter coming back into town. Where was she coming from?
So she had been on a month-long trip with her grandparents to Florida, actually. And so they returned that evening that Audrey went missing. And so Audrey was scheduled to pick her up that next morning. She didn't want to disturb her sleep. I mean, she was 10 at the time. And so let her sleep with grandma and grandpa, and then she was going to go pick her up the next morning.
Yeah, and it's interesting getting back to the timing things because she had that doctor's appointment, presumably, that she was coming up. Now she had reunited with her daughter after spending time apart. So you start looking at the timing of this thing and say, "Hey, could there be anything here?" And was this was this Audrey's parent she was with, uh, or her daughter's father's parent?
I want to say that it was Jeff's parents, but we would need to go back to confirm that. We've spoken with Audrey's stepmom, and it definitely was not Audrey's stepmom and her dad because she was there when Audrey was missing, and she's the one who filed the report. And when we spoke to her, she didn't say anything about we had just gotten back. So my sense is that it was either Jeff's family or maybe Audrey's biological mom and her husband. But that's a question we haven't asked, and we should.
Yeah, and I was just curious, and this the daughter that she hadn't seen for a month, was this just biological daughter, or was this the first daughter that Audrey had?
Yeah, this is her oldest child,
Okay,
not one of the children that biologically belonged to her and Jeff. They were much younger at the time.
which leads me to the next question, especially with the timing. What was her relationship like with her oldest daughter's biological father and his family?
We don't know of anything out of the ordinary in that. We do know that relatively quickly after Audrey disappeared, her oldest daughter did then relocate or was then living with her biological dad. So she no longer stayed at the home that Jeff and Audrey shared, that she did go with her biological dad. And we haven't heard any kind of problems or concerns with that relationship at all.
That never comes up.
Hmm. Do you know if police investigated? Because just like they would talk to Jeff, I think they would want to talk to her daughter's father as well. Do you know if that ever happened?
No, we're not aware of that.
Hmm. Okay. Um, so we talked about all these different theories, no real direction to go in. So it seems like almost anything is possible. Um, Hopefully, some of your FOIAs will answer some of these questions. You'll be able to get more, maybe rule some things out or really lock in on some things. When do you anticipate getting all the stuff you still want to do, and you mentioned talking to police. What's the timeline for all this?
So I requested the FOIA information about 4 weeks ago, and about 2 weeks ago, I did start an open line of communication with the trooper who is leading the case. And we are like currently this week in communication with him. And he has said, I could probably go on your show. There are certain things I can talk about, certain things I cannot. And I said, I'm happy to send you questions. And that way in advance, he can be as prepared as possible. So those questions are going out at the end of this week. And like I said, he's been very communicative. It isn't maybe 2 days, less than 2 days where he responds to me. So we will continue to open that line of communication, and hopefully we'll be able to get something scheduled maybe mid next week. Now the FOIA, I'm not sure. It just depends on, how long that process is. I have one with another case here in Florida with FDLE that I requested over 3 months ago, and I haven't had a response at all.
Yeah, FOIAs are all over
Just
the
never
place, as
know.
I'm sure you know. And there's times that we've gotten FOIAs for cases, and it's got 150 plus pages of really, really valuable information. And then we've gotten other FOIAs that we're going to send you 200 pages of information, and we get it. It's got 1 page of text, and the rest of it is redacted so much it looks like black construction paper.
And it took 6 months to get anything at all.
To get anything.
So I feel very, very good about the communication that's happening right now as far as who is leading Audrey's case.
Wow, that's good to hear, and it's good to know that they're still aggressively working on it. So again, I want to thank you both for coming on and talking about us and walking us through this case. I look forward to seeing what updates you can bring. And just for listeners, again, that maybe didn't catch you on the first episode, we're going to insert your promo in this episode so they can sort of get a sense of what your show's about and go over and check your episodes out. Can you tell listeners, remind them where they can find your show and maybe about your social media, website, that kind of stuff?
Yes. So we have, you can find us at Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast.com. That's probably the quickest way. All of our episodes are there. We also have a Facebook page, Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast. Facebook, we have an account on X, same thing, Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast. And we are also on Instagram. And we also have an email. So if anybody wants to reach out to us with questions or tips or case suggestions, Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast @gmail.com.
Awesome stuff. Well, Mike and Elisa, thank you so much for coming on and for walking us through this case. And we'd love to do it again with you sometime.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Missing Persons. If you can provide any information to help solve the case we discussed in this episode, please contact the appropriate authorities.
If you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to tell your friends about Missing Persons and invite them to listen to the show. Word of mouth will help us grow and bring these cases to a larger audience. You can also help us by taking a moment to rate and review Missing Persons on the platform you're listening to us now on. If you want to get early and ad-free access to new episodes of Missing Persons and help support the show in the process, please consider a subscription to our Apple Podcast. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll get early ad-free access to not only this show, but to every other show on the AbJack network of podcasts. You can get started with a free trial by searching for AbJack Entertainment in your Apple app, and we'll include a link in the show notes. If you want to find us on social media, we're on every major platform and on YouTube. Just search for Missing Persons Podcast. We'll include links to all of our social media in our show notes, and you can also visit our website, missingpersonspodcast.com. Finally, if you're in need of a platform to discuss a missing persons case that you're connected to, feel free to reach out to us on our website. We're happy to help. Just a reminder that new episodes of Missing Persons air every other Saturday. Hey everyone, it's Mike Morford. Just letting you know that Jessica and I will be taking a short hiatus working on some new cases to bring you. So keep an eye on the feed for new episodes when they drop in the near future. On behalf of Jess Betancourt, this is Mike Morford saying thanks, and we'll see you next time on Missing Persons.